What's the worst fairy type Pokemon? This question is quite difficult to answer for two reasons. The first is that fairy is the single best type in the game, so even bad fairy type Pokemon still have a lot going for them. The second reason is that there just aren't that many fairy type Pokemon in general. This is probably because fairy is the newest type added to the game. While they did go back and retroactively make older Pokemon fairy like Whimsicott and Wigglytuff and Clefable, they still don't have that much representation. So when you think about these two factors in common, the fact that there aren't that many fairy types and a lot of the fairy types are good, you can see perhaps why this list was a challenge. Luckily for me, the goal of this video is not to pick 10 bad fairy type Pokemon, it's to pick the 10 worst ones. And I made a list I feel pretty good about here. So let's start off by talking about number 10, a fairy type who is not bad, Aromatisse. Do people care about Aromatisse? I feel like it's a Pokemon that nobody has strong feelings about, but it's honestly pretty decent. Aromatisse is a pure fairy type Pokemon added in Generation 6. The main reason to use Aromatisse is because there's actually something unique about it that no other Pokemon in the game has. It's a combination of a move and an ability. The move is Trick Room. Trick Room is one of the best moves in competitive play because it allows slow Pokemon to attack before fast ones for the next 5 turns. It's very powerful. And the ability that Aromatisse gets is called Aroma Veil. Aroma Veil is not a very flashy ability. It's not like Unseen Fist or As One, but it can be really strong. If a Pokemon with Aroma Veil is on the field, both the Aroma Veil user and its partner are protected from the effects of certain moves. Moves that include Encore, Disable, and Taunt. That last one's a big one. One of the best ways you can stop Trick Room from going up if your team is weak to it is to use the move Taunt, which prevents a Pokemon from using any moves that don't do damage. With Aroma Veil, Aromatisse is completely immune to Taunt. This allows you to run a different item on Aromatisse, which is probably going to be increasing its chances of staying alive for longer. Now, this is a very strong combination, but it does beg the question as to why Aromatisse is like on the worst fairy type Pokemon list, right? If it has this strong combination. And the answer is that this is kind of all Aromatisse has going for it. Its stats are not bad, but they're not exceptional either. They're very fair, which is not a good thing when it comes to competitive Pokemon. Also, its move pool is somewhat limited. It does get the move Aromatic Mist, which is not very good, but I like a lot. It's a funny move. But other than that, it's pretty like basic is what I would say. I think the biggest issue with Aromatisse is that it's competing not only with other fairy type Pokemon, of which there are always very many strong ones, but also with other Trick Room setters. Aromatisse has way worse stats than many of the other best Trick Room setters, such as Cresselia and Porygon 2. And while these Pokemon do not have Aroma Veil, and I would say that in general their abilities are not as useful as Aromatisse's, having better stats is a big deal when you want to twist the dimensions. Anyway, despite this, Aromatisse has actually seen a lot of play. Well, not a lot of play. Aromatisse has seen more play than you might expect. It got top 8 on 2 different teams at the Australian Nationals in 2014, and surprisingly, it also got top 8 at a regional in 2019 alongside Primal Groudon and Zygarde. I don't have the details on these teams, so I can't tell you exactly what they were doing. The 2 in 2014 were definitely Trick Room teams. The one in 2019, I really don't know. But the fact that it's been used in multiple different formats and has 3 different top 8s is actually quite impressive. Coming in at number 9 is Florges. And okay, there's something I have to address first, which is that when I'm making these lists, I typically use the strongest form of a Pokemon's evolutionary line to consider whether or not they should be on the list. So for example, I wouldn't put Porygon Z on the worst normal type list because Porygon 2 is one of the best normal types. Also, Porygon Z is good, but you get the point. Here's where this gets tricky with Florges. So Florges on its own definitely deserves to be on this list. It's not a bad fairy type Pokemon, but it is one of the worst because so many of them are good. Where it gets tricky though is that Florges' pre-evolution Floette has an alternate form called Eternal Floette. This is a mega evolution that is currently dominating competitive play. And so you would think, well, if Eternal Floette is so good, maybe you shouldn't put Florges on the list, but Eternal Floette cannot evolve into Florges. It's its own special Pokemon. So I think it makes sense to put Florges on this list, but if you want to consider Eternal Floette as part of the Florges line, then yeah, it shouldn't be here, sorry. Anyway, Florges is like genuinely a pretty good Pokemon. The biggest thing it has going for it is probably its stats. It's one of the most specially bulky Pokemon in the game, and it has a totally solid special attack stat as well. It's not necessarily here as a pure damage dealer, but as a reliable Pokemon who can stick around and output damage turn after turn. It also has 2 relatively unique abilities you can build your team around if you're feeling ambitious. The first is Flower Veil, which protects grass-type partner Pokemon from having their stats lowered and also status conditions. I actually played against this at a tournament in Scarlet and Violet where they led it with Hearthflame Ogerpon, and I tried to intimidate it, and it did not work because I forgot what Flower Veil did. The other ability is called Symbiosis, and it can set up for some really mean combos. The way Symbiosis works is that when a Pokemon consumes its held item, if your partner Pokemon is Symbiosis, they will pass their held item to the Pokemon who just like used up their item. I think I also played against this in Scarlet and Violet. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did, which is, let's say you have a Flutter Mane with the booster energy item. When you send it a Pokemon with the booster energy, as long as the sun is not up, the item is consumed and the Pokemon gets a temporary stat boost until they switch out. So for example, you could have your Flutter Mane use booster energy to get a special attack boost, giving it 30% more power. But if you do this and you have Florges on the field next to your Flutter Mane, Symbiosis will activate and will pass whatever item Florges is holding to its partner Flutter Mane. So if your Florges is holding the Choice Specs, you can pass that item onto Flutter Mane and get both booster energy and Choice Specs. And this all happens passively, like everything happens here before the turn even begins in this example. So you can do some interesting stuff with it. That being said, both of these strategies are a little bit niche, and I think that's the reason why Florges hasn't seen more use. Like they both tend to be somewhat committal and somewhat narrow. For example, if you put Choice Specs on your Florges, it's going to be somewhat difficult to use it in any situation where it's not passing that Choice Specs off to one of your partner Pokemon. Doesn't mean that it can't happen, just means like you need to be aware of it, that it is kind of conditional. And Flower Veil, while it is a strong ability, is only really strong when it's paired with a very powerful grass type Pokemon, which throughout the course of like the history of competitive Pokemon, most grass type Pokemon are more defensive than offensive. And so it ends up being kind of a special case like, you know, Ogerpon, where it becomes very threatening. I think the other big issue with Florges is the speed. In general, in competitive Pokemon, you really want to be attacking first. It's not mandatory, but typically attacking first gives you the best odds of winning a battle. And Florges doesn't really get any good speed control moves, and it finds itself at an awkward speed tier. As we saw with Aromatisse, some fairy type Pokemon can learn Trick Room, but Florges does not. I think if Florges got Trick Room, it would be genuinely extremely strong. And it's probably not a surprise, but it doesn't learn like Tailwind or Icy Wind or any other decent speed control moves. It doesn't even learn Thunder Wave, which many Pokemon who are not electric type get. Despite this, Florges actually has pretty decent results. Pretty good results, frankly. It did really well in 2014. It got top 16 at UK Nationals, then top 8 in Italy Nationals, and then top 16 at the World Championships, all used by Ben Kiriakou, who's now one of the best commentators. I actually have access to his team here, and I can see that he paired it with Ferrothorn and with the ability Flower Veil to prevent Ferrothorn's stats from being lowered, and he used Light Screen actually to help increase Ferrothorn's special bulk, so it could do good damage with its offenses without having to worry about Intimidate, and also it had Leech Seed. This team was very bulky in general. He also had Mega Manectric and Mega Gyarados, which are two different forms of Intimidate, and this is actually one of Moltres' best results ever. Florges saw a bit more success in other years as well. In 2015, it got third at a regional, which I believe this was still the 2014 format, but it's hard for me to tell. No, that can't be right. It was in April. I guess it was a 2014 legal team in 2015. That's quite unusual. And these results are all obviously within Generation 6 when the power level was lower, but Florges actually has even more results. In 2018, in Generation 7, Florges actually got top 8 at another regional, this time paired with Kartana, which is another one of the offensive grass type Pokemon who doesn't want to have its stats lowered, and actually again was used by Ben Kiriakou. The Kartana on this team had Grass EMZ, and Florges also had Helping Hand, so you could do Helping Hand and then Grass Z move and you wouldn't have to worry about Intimidate. And I mean, I didn't play against it, or if I did, I don't remember, but it sounds really scary. And actually, this isn't the end of Florges' results. It also got 5th place in Perth Regionals in 2023 in Scarlet and Violet, so it's still getting results. It looks like it was paired with a Recovery Berry Stockpile Gastrodon, so I guess the idea was that you could stockpile your Gastrodon, get really bulky, and if it got too low, you could switch Florges in if you expected to eat your berry on the turn and just get a second berry. It was also paired with a Recovery Berry Arcanine as well, which is another Pokemon that appreciates healing. Obviously, I don't know for sure what the intention was here. Maybe the idea was just Florges was going to eat its own berry, but I still think it's kind of neat. If you're enjoying this video, please do me a favor and just double check to see if you're subscribed. Many people watch the videos and are not subscribed, and I always get comments that are like, I thought I was subscribed and I wasn't. And I'm like, yep, that's why I say this. And then I get comments that are like, I hate you for asking me to subscribe. I hope you step on a rock. And then I feel kind of sad. Anyway, let's talk about number 8 in our list, Carbink. Carbink is the first Pokemon on our list that I could forget was a fairy type. I didn't, obviously, because it's here, but I almost did. Carbink is a very strange Pokemon. It's a rock and fairy type Pokemon, which on the whole is not very good. And its stats are really bizarre. It has great defense and special defense, truly incredible defense and special defense, but it has super low HP, which means it can't really take advantage of this as well as you would like. And it's also slow, and it also has no offenses. So on paper, it makes sense that it would be on this list. But the question I think is, why is it not lower on the list? Higher on the list? Lower? I don't know. How come it's not a worse fairy type? And the answer is that Carbink is kind of unique in what it can do. Carbink is another fairy type Pokemon that learns Trick Room, and a Trick Room setter with great defenses in general is pretty strong. While I did just say that fairy and rock is not a good type combination, there are some advantages to it. For example, in formats with Pokemon like Mega Salamence, you have actually a really good defensive profile. You can also get some other useful resistances like to fire type Pokemon when Mega Charizard is really strong. However, the main reason to use Carbink, in my opinion, does have to do with its huge defenses, but not because it's actually using them itself. What makes Carbink Carbink unique is the fact that it gets the attack Guard Split. Guard Split is very simple. When you hit a Pokemon with Guard Split, it averages your defense and your special defense with the target's defense and special defense. So if Carbink has, 200 defense and it hits a Pokemon with Guard Split that has 100 defense, they both would end up with 150 defense. And the idea with this move is that you use it on your own partner Pokemon to make them tankier. When I think about Carbink, I think about Chansey. There was a strategy in like the 2017-2018 era that used Chansey as its main focal point. The general strategy was to use moves like Minimize to make Chansey impossible to hit, and Defense Curl to make it even tankier, and then Toxic or Seismic Toss to wear down the opponent. But the problem with Chansey, of course, is that it has paper-thin defenses, like some of the lowest in the entire franchise. Unless, of course, you pair it with Carbink. This strategy was occasionally used with Shuckle as well, but the advantage of Carbink is that Carbink can set Trick Room up. And also, I don't think Shuckle was available every time this strategy was used. So basically, you would start the battle, you'd go for Trick Room with Carbink, maybe you'd use like a Fake Out partner, or you'd use like a Memento partner, and you'd try to get Trick Room up safely. And then you would bring in Chansey on the turn to use Guard Split. And you'd be adding Chansey's defense, which is like 40, with Carbink's defense, which was like probably over 220 if I had to guess on a lot of these teams. And this would give Chansey over 100 defense, meaning it was actually quite tanky when you consider that Chansey has a huge HP stat and could hold the Eviolite item, which was then multiplying that defense stat by 50%. This was a super evil strategy, and like there were guides put out as to how to beat it back in the day because everyone was losing to it and they were really frustrated. People got really mad at the strategy. They would go online and they would like rage at people who brought it to their local events. It was like a point of contention. Anyway, Carbink enabled this strategy. However, there are no recorded results with Carbink using the strategy on the main website that keeps track of these things. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, like that people didn't have success with it. It just means that the website is like a little bit more incomplete when it comes to older games. But Carbink has a non-Chansey recorded top 16 at Korean Nationals in 2018. It was paired with Shedinja, Komao, Incineroar, Tapu Fini, and Mega Lopunny as the only Mega on the team. I can't tell you what this team did. I don't know what Carbink was doing here, to be honest. But I mean, hey, that's a major result. Top 16 in Nationals is a pretty big deal. So Carbink also apparently has some use outside of just being used to set up Chansey. Now, of course, the strategy is pretty niche, so it probably makes some sense that Carbink is not, a great fairy type Pokemon, but it is a strategy and it did have something to do. Our number 7 Pokemon is one of the most hated fairy type Pokemon ever. It's Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is a Pokemon you might expect to be even lower on our list. It doesn't look like a very good Pokemon. It's a Gen 1 single stage Pokemon, whatever. Also, I'm only talking about Kanto Mr. Mime because Galarian Mr. Mime isn't a fairy type. Anyway, Mr. Mime looks like it should be pretty bad, but it actually isn't that bad. And I speak from experience because I actually brought it to a regional tournament where I finished, I think it was top 8, but it might have been top 16. This is back in 2014. So, okay, what is Mr. Mime doing? Mr. Mime has a couple things going for it, and a lot of it has to do with its move pool. It's a Fake Out user, which is a very valuable move in competitive play, and it also gets some other useful supporting moves. When I used Mr. Mime, I had Fake Out on it, I had Icy Wind for speed control, and I had the move Wide Guard for team-wide support. There are very few Pokemon in the game, maybe no other Pokemon in the game that have this unique combination of 3 moves. There's probably another one. There's probably some fighting type that gets all 3, but it's pretty rare. Mr. Mime also has like decent stats. Decent is maybe giving it a little bit too much credit, but it has stats that you can do something with. It has very low HP, some of the worst HP I've ever seen on any Pokemon. It's actually, is this right? Yeah, wow, that's bad. It is really bad HP and also really bad defense. It's so terrible on the physical side, but it actually has quite high special defense, good enough special attack, and a decent speed stat. Its stats are certainly not anything to write home about, but it is like good enough that especially on the special side, it's able to take many hits, and it's able to take even more hits because of its ability Filter, which reduces the power of incoming super effective attacks. Now, Mr. Mime has 2 recorded top 8s that are not mine. Mine is actually not even recorded on here, and one of them I think probably used Mr. Mime's other ability. Well, it has 2 other abilities. One of them you would never use. It's Technician. It's not very good on Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime also gets Soundproof. And it appears to me that in 2018, at a special event, Mr. Mime got top 8, and I think it probably had Soundproof because he was paired with Mega Gengar, and there's several other Pokemon on this team that make me think this team used the Perish Trap strategy, since it also had Komao, who was also a Soundproof user, as well as Incineroar and Tapu Bulu, who are common partners for Mega Gengar, who are using Perish Trap back in the day. Funnily enough, Mr. Mime actually has another recorded top 8 in Taiwan, getting 8th place there, and was paired actually with Chansey and Shuckle, as well as a couple other supporting Pokemon like Smeargle, Gothitelle, and Reuniclus for that Chansey strategy that I told you about earlier. I don't know exactly what Mr. Mime was doing here. It does also get Guard Split, but because it has such low base defense, I can't imagine that's what it was doing here. But yeah, Mr. Mime actually has pretty decent results. These are both from 2018 and are obviously a little bit more niche teams. Like neither of these was especially meta usage. There was never a time where Mr. Mime was, the most popular Pokemon or anything close to it. But I do think that it has kind of a unique supporting kit that allows it to actually contribute, especially in formats where the power level is lower, and especially in formats that are more specially based, so it doesn't just get one shot by everything. This is the point in the list where the Pokemon transition a little bit in terms of how good they are. There's no more Pokemon that plays top 8 at any event going forward. The next 2 Pokemon on the list are the very tail end of Pokemon that have results, and the remaining 4 Pokemon don't have any results. So coming in at number 6, let's talk about Dachsbun. I don't think Dachsbun is actually that bad. I think Dachsbun suffers a little bit because it's a newer Pokemon, and newer Pokemon in general have less opportunities for results and are kind of subject to the formats that they find themselves in. One example I think about is a Pokemon like Kleavor, who is like certainly not a bad Pokemon, but when it was added in alongside Urshifu, and so it took a little bit for it to get some results, even though it really wasn't actually as bad as the results would have you believe. Anyway, we're not talking about Kleavor, we're talking about Dachsbun. Dachsbun is a pure fairy type Pokemon introduced in Scarlet and Violet. Funnily enough, it actually shares an ability with Aromatisse in Aromavale, which is again not a very common ability. I think there's only like 3 or 4 Pokemon lines that even get it. There's like 4 Pokemon lines that get it. I guess to be fair, 3 of them are fairy type, and so 2 of them are on the list. But yeah, it's a good ability, although Dachsbun is not as good a user of it, and the main reason to use Dachsbun is because of its other abilities, so you basically never see this ability used on Dachsbun. Dachsbun's other ability is called Well-Baked Body. It is a signature ability unique to this line, and it not only gives the user a fire type immunity, but it also boosts its defense stat by 2 stages whenever it's hit by a fire type move. This is a very good ability, a very, very good ability. The fire type is always common in competitive play. It is always used. Being immune to it on its own is already useful. We've seen Pokemon like Heatran and Chandelure do quite well over the years, in part because of their fire type immunity with Flash Fire. Ceruledge most recently is popping off in part because of its, immunity to fire. So the fact that Dachsbun is not only immune, but doubles its defense stat or gets +2 in its defense stat whenever hit by a fire move, that's very, very good. And I think that this is a Pokemon where the developers were afraid of it becoming too good, because that's kind of all Dachsbun has going for it. The stats are okay. They are not unusable. It has a pretty good base defense stat, usable special defense, low HP, good speed, or like good speed for a Pokemon that is, more defensive in nature. The offenses are pretty bad. So that's the first problem with Dachsbun, is that it doesn't have a lot to do offensively. However, it does have something to do, which is that it gets the move Body Press. Body Press is a unique move that uses the user's defense stat to do damage rather than its attack stat, which is, the norm. And so what this allows you to do is to build a strategy around Dachsbun where you try and raise your own defense stat using, your own fire moves like Lava Plume, or maybe just attacking it directly, and then do tons of damage with Body Press. And this is like a viable strategy, but it's not really the easiest one, because if you don't get your defense boosts, or if your opponent has strong special attacks, then it can be a little bit awkward for Dachsbun to actually do anything. That being said, Dachsbun did get some results. The first one was in the very first year of Scarlet and Violet in 2023, where it was actually paired with Choice Scarf Lava Plume Chi-Yu. So the idea was basically that Chi-Yu would use Lava Plume, it would hit all Pokemon on the field, it would double Dachsbun's defense, it would have a chance to burn anything that it hit on the opponent's side of the field, and then Dachsbun could either use Body Press for damage, or it could use moves like Yawn for disruption, or Wish for healing. It seems like a pretty strong 2 Pokemon combo. The other team was actually used 2 years later in Regulation H, paired with 2 different fire type Pokemon, both Torkoal and Typhlosion, both of whom had Lava Plume. This Dachsbun was a little bit more supportive. It used Helping Hand, which is a very powerful move, so it could potentially boost, the damage of these Lava Plumes, or just Eruption from Typhlosion. This is actually Choice Specs Typhlosion, so it could do a lot of damage. And Dachsbun also had Snarl on this team to help reduce the special attack of opposing Pokemon. I think it's a really cool Pokemon. I think the ability is really interesting. I think that if it were around in the first regulations of Pokemon Champions, you would really seriously consider using it, because like not only is fire type really good right now with Charizard Y, but also the whole format is physical, so pairing this with the Lava Plume user would be really strong. It's actually a real shame in my opinion that it's not around. Yeah, its last appearance was in Legends ZA, so I think it's a Pokemon that actually could, if it was legal right now, be very, very strong, but unfortunately it isn't. That being said, it's a Pokemon where I'm sure the conditions for it to be good will appear sometime in the future, at least I suspect so. So I think that even though it's on the worst list right now, I would not be shocked at all if there was a world where in a couple of years it has earned its place off of this list. Coming in at number 5 is the final fairy type Pokemon with no results. It's Granbull. And I want to start off by saying I don't think Granbull is that bad of a Pokemon. It's a pure fairy type, which is very good. It has a very useful ability in Intimidate, and it gets a pretty good move pool, including a lot of different coverage moves, which is good because it actually has a high attack stat, meaning it can actually do damage. To elaborate a little bit more, Intimidate, very good ability, very strong, used very often for a reason. And in terms of coverage moves, it gets moves like Close Combat, like Stone Edge, like Earthquake, Ice Fang, Fire Fang, all the fangs. Play Rough obviously is a powerful fairy type attack. It actually gets the punches. Forget the fangs. It gets Ice Punch and Fire Punch. It gets Psychic Fangs, low sweep, rock tomb, low kick, lots of like really good coverage moves here. Basically has everything that you could want. Probably taking advantage of the fact that it was a normal type Pokemon before it was a fairy type Pokemon. A normal type Pokemon tend to have really good move pools. It gets outrage. There's two big issues with Granbull that prevent it from seeing more use. The first is that while the stats are overall pretty good, they're not exceptional, and the stats that matter are, well, what I should say actually is that the speed is really low. It's a very, very slow Pokemon, which is not inherently a problem. This is a Pokemon that could see use on Trick Room in theory. But the problem is that if you want a Pokemon inside Trick Room, you want it to be a little bit more explosive. And Granbull, while strong, is very fair. If Granbull had like 100 base speed or 90 base speed, I think it would see actually some play. But because it's so slow, it basically requires you to support it in order to attack. It also has good natural bulk, but it's not exceptional. The special defense stat is quite low. And even though the HP stat is pretty good, compensating for its, low special defense and middling defense in general, because Granbull is so slow, it's often attacking after your opponents have already attacked, and therefore its defenses matter a little bit more. It also doesn't get many priority moves. It doesn't get Sucker Punch. It doesn't get Mach Punch. I can't see any priority moves with a quick scroll here that it does get that are actually, worth using. At least none that do damage, like I guess Helping Hand and Protect, of course. So anyway, one of the problems with Granbull is that it is very slow, but I actually think that this isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem with Granbull is that it's not necessarily worth using over other similar Pokemon. For example, I was saying that Granbull has a pretty good attack stat, right? Base 120 is pretty high, but I just realized that Incineroar has a base attack stat of 115 and also gets Intimidate and has better defenses and also has good and useful coverage moves. And so if you want an Intimidate Pokemon that can work inside Trick Room that, can do good damage, you could just run Incineroar. And it's not a 1-for-1 because Granbull does get more coverage moves than Incineroar, can use moves like Ice Punch. Fairy type offensively is really good. Play Rough is a very good move offensively, but like, is it worth using Granbull over Incineroar just for Play Rough? And also there are other fairy type Pokemon that can fill this role, right? Like most recently Mega Mawile, very strong Pokemon. And although it takes your Mega Slot, it is a fairy type Pokemon that is slow, that works inside Trick Room, that has priority and a very useful secondary type. Mawile is the best typing in the game. And there are other examples as well. Like if you want a fairy type Pokemon for damage, you might consider something like Sylveon, who, is bulkier, and although it's not a physical attacker, is also stronger and faster as well, right? And so I think that Granbull could be used in a format that's very limited in terms of its competitors, but there's just so many Pokemon that do something similar that it's hard to imagine Granbull really popping off. That being said, Granbull does have a result as recently as 2026 being used in Regulation F in the Sydney Regional Championship. This Granbull actually used the Assault Vest item to increase its bulk and used the moves Snarl, Close Combat, Super Fang, and Play Rough. It was actually one of 2 fairy type Pokemon on the team as a fun fact. This team also had a Booster Energy Screamtail. My guess is that they wanted the defensive profile of Granbull and they wanted to be able to slow opponents down before Pokemon like Choice Band Dragonite or Ogerpon Wellspring came in, or Chenpao. So maybe in the early game they would use Super Fang to weaken opponents, get them to half HP, use Snarl to slow them down, and then bring in big hitters like Choice Band, Terra Normal Dragonite, and just try and sweep through the team. I don't know for sure, that is my guess. Anyway, even though Granbull does not have many results, it's certainly not a bad Pokemon, it's certainly not a bad fairy type, it's just one of the worst ones. And that is our last Pokemon with a recorded result. Every Pokemon left has no recorded results. It doesn't mean it has no results, as I mentioned earlier, it just means that there's nothing recorded. Coming in at number 4, I think is a Pokemon that's going to surprise a lot of people that it's on this list, let alone that it has no results, and that's Slurpuff. So Slurpuff is actually a pretty good Pokemon when it comes to single battles, or at least it was at one point. What makes it strong in single battles is mostly its move pool. Slurpuff gets the move Belly Drum, which cuts its HP in half, and then will max out its attack stats. In single battles, this pairs quite nicely with its ability Unburden. Unburden doubles your speed when your held item is consumed. So the general strategy is to bring Slurpuff in when it isn't threatened, go for a Belly Drum to cut your HP in half, eat your Citrus Berry, which activates when you're at half HP, heal back to 75% of your maximum health, and in doing all this, you double your speed and you quadruple your attack stat, basically. And then hopefully you sweep through your opponent's team. It also has another set it can use in single battles where it uses the Sticky Web move, which sets up a field condition on the opponent's side of the field, which lowers the speed stat of any Pokemon that switches in. This can be very, very dangerous in single battles, but the thing about both these strategies is that they're not really as good in double battles. The Belly Drum strategy is just too volatile. There's way more priority in double battles in general, I think. And if your opponent has 2 strong attackers on the field, the odds of you being able to set up safely is just not very high. And while it is true that Sticky Web has seen some limited use, it's also true that it's not nearly as good in double battles because there's only 4 Pokemon total. It doesn't work on any Pokemon that are in the air, which is a lot of Pokemon that tend to be good in competitive play. And because you start with 2 Pokemon on the field, Sticky Web might only affect 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, even if they are both grounded, since it's 4 against 4 total. Whereas in single battles, if you use it on the first turn, you're affecting up to 5 of your opponent's Pokemon, even if they, never switch in and out. So basically, it's not that Slurpuff has nothing going for it, it's that what it has going for it is not super applicable in double battles. Slurpuff also has the ability Sweet Veil, which prevents itself and any of its partner Pokemon from falling asleep, but this isn't really worth using. Slurpuff has similar stats to Aromatisse. It's kind of like an all-rounder Pokemon, though I think that Slurpuff stats are a little bit worse. And I think it also struggles for similar reasons why Granbull struggles, which is that there are so many good fairy type Pokemon and Slurpuff doesn't really stand out, except for the reasons that we've already talked about, and those reasons aren't very good. It's not terrible, like it is a little bit surprising to me that it has no recorded results, but I think it makes sense in the context of like, you often aren't going to want to stack fairy type Pokemon on a team, and for the most part, Slurpuff is going to end up being an inferior version of Aromatisse unless you're doing one of these two very specific things, and even Aromatisse is on this list. So it isn't terrible, and I wouldn't be shocked if at some point it got some half decent result, but it is a Pokemon where I think it makes sense that it is not so easy to use, and therefore it does belong on this list. Okay, we have a couple honorable mentions before we talk about our top 3. Pokemon I initially considered for this list include Comfey. Comfey is a Pokemon who doesn't have that many high highs. In fact, I think that its peaks are perhaps even worse than Pokemon like Florges and Aromatisse, but it has been used a lot and it is very unique in what it does. Basically, Comfey has the ability Triage, which gives super priority to any move that is healing attached. It gives +3 priority, which is actually the same stage as Fake Out, or higher than Fake Out, or is it +2 or +3? Hold on. Hold please. Okay, I was right. Yeah, it has the same, it says the same level of priority as Fake Out. So it's actually one of the few Pokemon that can use a damaging move like Draining Kiss before Incineroar uses Fake Out. It's quite dangerous. Comfey gets the signature move Floral Healing, which is kind of just like Super Heal Pulse. It heals a partner for 50% of their maximum health, but it goes up to 2/3 of their maximum health if Grassy Terrain is active. It's overall a very strong effect, especially given that this has priority. So even though Comfey doesn't have that many good results, it has been used often over the years, and it has like this whole unique toolkit that's unique not only among the fairy types, but unique among all Pokemon in general. So I didn't think it belonged on this list. Pheasantipity is a fairy and poison type Pokemon that I initially thought might be on this list, but it has some results, saw a little bit of play, and it just has better stats than anything else on this list. And so I thought, yeah, it probably doesn't belong here. It'll probably be good at some point. Enamorus is another Pokemon that I initially considered for this list, but then I remembered that the Therian form actually has some decent results. And it's another Pokemon where the stats are so good that it just felt weird putting them next to Pokemon like Mr. Mime. The last honorable mention, and probably the most surprising one for a lot of you, is that Wigglytuff is not on this list. Wigglytuff is a bad Pokemon for sure. However, Wigglytuff is also a regional champion. It actually won a regional back in 2014 using the competitive ability, which gives it 2 stages of special attack boost whenever any of its stats are lowered. This was a format with tons of Intimidate Pokemon, and I think a lot of people did not know that Wigglytuff had competitive, and Wigglytuff basically was able to use that to get a ton of stat boosts, use powerful coverage moves like Fire Blast and Thunderbolt, as well as Hyper Beam and Dazzling Gleam with the Assault Vest, and ultimately win the regional. So I didn't think I could put it on this list, even though spiritually it does belong here. Okay, 3 Pokemon left. Let's start by talking about the 3rd worst fairy type Pokemon, Shiinotic. Shiinotic is interesting because it's almost good. It's almost very good. What do I mean by this? Shiinotic is a grass and fairy type Pokemon. It has pretty decent defenses. It has okay defenses. It's not great. It's quite slow and it has a low but usable special attack stat. However, it can still do decent damage because it gets the move Moonblast, which is a very powerful move, and coming off of even a relatively low special attack stat will still do good damage. What makes Shiinotic strong though is its supporting moves. It's moves that don't do damage. Most notably, that's Spore, which puts an opposing Pokemon to sleep guaranteed. Sleep is a very powerful status condition. You do not want to be put to sleep, and Spore is a 100% accurate sleep move, the only 100% accurate sleep move in fact. Overall, Spore plus decent bulk plus okay defensive typing, pretty good. Shiinotic also gets the move Strength Sap, which at one point may have been its signature move, which is a really reliable healing move, especially on a Pokemon with low base HP. These are all good things, so why do I say that Shiinotic is almost good? And the answer is that Amoonguss exists, and Amoonguss is kind of just like Mega Shiinotic. Funnily enough, even though Poison is a worse type than Fairy, by a lot, as a defensive type when paired with Grass, Poison is actually a lot more valuable than Fairy. Your defensive profile actually ends up being a bit more well-balanced in my opinion, and crucially, Amoonguss is neutral poison, while Shiinotic is actually quadruple weak to it, which is a real liability on a slow defensive Pokemon. Amoonguss also gets the move Rage Powder, which Shiinotic does not get. This mushroom apparently does not make anybody angry. And similar to some of the other Fairy types we talked about today, there's no reason to use Shiinotic when Amoonguss exists. Even just considering stats and typing, Amoonguss is a lot better, but the abilities, there's a huge gap. Shiinotic gets 3 abilities. There's Illumina Illuminate, which raises the odds of you running into wild Pokemon and does nothing in competitive play. There's Effect Spore, which is an ability that Amoonguss also gets. And then there's Rain Dish, which heals it for a little bit of health, 1/16 of its maximum health, only when the rain is active. Compare this to Amoonguss, who can heal a third of its health every time it switches out, and you can see that there's really no reason to use Shiinotic. Really, the only world where I can envision Shiinotic being used is a world where there's no Amoonguss in the game. And we could live in this world, but honestly, I feel like people have gotten so used to Amoonguss that it would be hard for them to justify using Shiinotic, even if Amoonguss wasn't around. Like, the knowledge of what it could be is just too painful, so they wouldn't even bother with Shiinotic. Shiinotic is a very unfortunate Pokemon. I hope to be wrong. I hope that at some point, you know, maybe it gets an evolution or maybe it gets some usage for some reason, but I think that it's a Pokemon that is certainly one of the worst fairy types. But to me, at least, it was very clearly third. And where I got stuck making this list was between first and second, because both first and second are quite bad. Neither are Pokemon I expect to ever get any results. How do I choose? In the end, I decided to judge them based on their potential. I think I've done an okay job here. So after a lot of deliberation, I'm pleased to announce that the second worst fairy type Pokemon of all time is Galarian Rapidash. Galarian Rapidash makes me quite mad because Rapidash is so cool. Rapidash is a horse on fire. It is so cool. It's iconic. Ash riding it in the first ever anime opening, very memorable, but its stats are really bad. And I don't blame original form of Rapidash for having bad stats because it's generation 1 and they didn't know what this was going to turn into, right? So when I heard about Galarian Rapidash, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, this is a chance for them to fix it. And they didn't. They might have made it worse. It is so bad. Galarian Rapidash is a psychic and fairy type, which is not terrible, but it's not great. They gave it 3 abilities, 2 of which are worthless. The first being Runaway, which does nothing in trainer battles, only helps you run away from wild Pokemon. The second is Anticipation, which is basically a worthless ability most of the time, but it's okay because the third ability is Signature. It's unique. They created this ability just to make Rapidash good, right? It's Pastel Veil. Do y'all know what Pastel Veil does? Probably not, because nobody ever uses this Pokemon because it's garbage. Pastel Veil prevents the user and its ally Pokemon from being poisoned. It's fine. Poison is not used very often in competitive play. It is used sometimes. Like, I recently got third at, North American Internationals with Toxic Toxapex. Sometimes Sludge Bomb will poison stuff. The Weezings will sometimes run Toxic Spikes. But like, it's not worth using Galarian Rapidash to prevent this. You know what I mean? You could just run a Poison or a Steel type and be just fine. Okay, so the abilities aren't that good, but like, okay, there's gotta be some stuff that Galarian Rapidash has going for it. What about the stats, right? That's the biggest issue with Rapidash. They surely fixed the stats. Here's a fun fact. They didn't change the stats. They didn't change them even a little bit. They are identical to Kanto Rapidash, which again was the single biggest problem with the original Rapidash form. To me, this is the single biggest indicator that they just didn't want this thing to be good. I don't know why, but like, nobody cared about this thing when they were making it. I will say that even though the stats are bad, they're not, I don't want to say they're unusable. They're better than the number 1 Pokemon on the list. This was the deciding factor, was the stats, because they both have bad move pools and bad abilities. In defense of Galarian Rapidash, it is fast. It is 105 base speed. Getting over the 100 base speed hump is a big deal. Its defenses are totally fine. Like, it's not going to get one shot by most neutral attacks. And it has base 100 attack, which is low, but not terrible. So you can use it in theory. I would say that actually the move pool is probably the thing that it has going for it most. It gets some decent physical attacks like Play Rough, High Horsepower, Psycho Cut. It has some decent coverage moves as well if you're interested in that. It can set up with Calm Mind. You could do Expanding Force with it if you wanted. It's not great, okay? They both get Wild Charge. Like, it's okay. It has a decent move pool. The real issue is the stats and the abilities. Yeah, and the typing is not good either, but the moves are okay. Anyway, it is undoubtedly one of the worst fairy type Pokemon, but it isn't technically unusable. And that was enough to keep it out of the number 1 slot. The number 1 slot, of course, going to a Pokemon that some of you will recognize. It is, of course, a Pokemon that I unfortunately have beat up on a couple times on this channel. It's Dedenne. Dedenne, oh my god. So Dedenne, it's so bad. It's so bad. Okay. So the ability is not very good. The stats also not very good. They're similar to Rapidash, but kind of just a little bit worse across the board. And the moves are also pretty lacking. However, I do have to make an announcement here. So Dedenne kind of has nothing going for it, right? The typing is honestly pretty decent, like especially offensively, but it doesn't have the stats to do damage offensively, which is not good. But one of the big things that I've ragged on Dedenne before was the fact that it's like, it doesn't get a lot of the moves that many of the other Pikachu clones get. Like, it doesn't get Follow Me, it doesn't get Fake Out, except now it does get Fake Out. And so I am pleased to report that even though Dedenne is the worst fairy type Pokemon, it has something to do now. Like, you could use it maybe. There are some niche things you can do. It has the ability Plus and the move Entrainment. So you could use Entrainment to give Plus to other Pokemon. This is basically like using Helping Hand of your partner. Plus gives a Pokemon a 50% damage boost. If both Pokemon in the field have either plus or minus, you could use this to overwrite your foe's abilities. I could see a world where somebody uses like Fake Out, Nuzzle, Entrainment, Dazzling Gleam or something. something. It's not good, but it is something. You could use Super Fang as well. Although I also have to clarify here. Dedenne gets fake out in Legends ZA. It does not get it in Scarlet and Violet, and we haven't seen Dedenne added to Champions yet. So it's also possible that they only gave it fake out in Legends ZA and then they don't give it to it in Champions. Like this was a case for other Pokemon, like most famously perhaps Golurk got the move Fissure, which would have been extremely broken with the ability No Guard, causing Fissure to always hit. So we don't know for sure that it gets fake out, but for the sake of this video, I'm willing to be optimistic and say that somebody at Game Freak has been watching these videos and said, hey, like we gotta do something for Dedenne. We can't keep letting him beat up on it. So it's not a very good Pokemon. It'll never be a very good Pokemon is my guess. I'd love to be wrong, but it is a Pokemon that now has a little bit more going for it. And that's my list of the worst fairy type Pokemon. If you like this video, well, I have good news. It's part of a series. And so I have two options for you that you can watch. You can either check out the most recent video in the worst type series, which is the worst steel type Pokemon, or you can go and watch the best fairy type Pokemon video. Bye bye.